Representative Kevin Brady, Republican of Texas, is on your screen. He's chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, a member of the Ways and Means Subcommittee. But I want to start where we left off in our last segment, and that's with the gun control debate. Representative Brady, are you a gun owner?
Yeah, I'm not.
You are not. Why not?
I've just made that choice, but I'm in a state, in Texas, in a region where we have a great deal of respect for guns, where we have, I think, probably one of the most, I think, sophisticated concealed handgun weapons approach. More than 500,000 Texans have them, and it is a safe environment. I live at home in Montgomery County, outside of Houston, with my family, but I work up here in Washington, D.C., which is, in effect, a gun-free community, or at least says so by law. I feel so much safer at home in Texas than I do working here in Washington, and it is another example, I think, where I think people have good intentions, but the laws that they keep piling on without really enforcing them doesn't make us safer.
Now, Representative Brady, you have a personal story when it comes to guns. What happened when you were 12 years old?
Well, my father was an attorney in a small town, took on a tough case for our church. The gentleman, the other party, threatened him and our family, and my mom actually had to learn to use a gun for safety. Unfortunately, when the trial began, this gentleman in the courtroom shot and killed my father, his wife, and the judge who survived, thankfully. And so I was 12. At the time, Mom raised 5 of us by herself, so we obviously know the impact of gun violence on families. And so, yeah, this is a tougher issue.
Has that affected how you feel about the Second Amendment, about guns, background checks?
You know, in a sense, from the standpoint of each of these issues become pretty personal quickly. I don't know the pain of losing a child. I do know the opposite of that, losing a parent. And I also look, though, at the effectiveness of these proposals. You know, will they stop another shooting at a school, at a movie theater, of a congresswoman? Will it make us safer? And will it protect our Second Amendment rights? And unfortunately, I think Congress's rush always to do something oftentimes results in doing something that doesn't work. And I think really violates, for states like us, for communities like ours, what we believe are very strong Second Amendment rights.
To look at some other issues, and this is the lead editorial this morning in the Washington Post, an offer to negotiate regarding the president's budget. Though far from perfect, the budget President Obama released Wednesday represents the best hope for replacing sequestration with a bipartisan deficit reduction deal before the federal government hits its statutory borrowing limit in late summer and before Congress gets paralyzed by the politics of the 2014 election. Unlike the plan approved by the Republican majority in the House, Mr. Obama's offering does not purport to balance the budget within 10 years without new tax increases. This is good, since a GOP plan would accomplish that feat through excessive domestic spending cuts, falling most heavily on those Americans least able to afford them.
I don't think the president's budget, coming this late, after the House Senate has already passed their budgets, it's a little like arriving at the gate after the flight has already left and saying, hey, look, I've got a ticket too. I'm not sure it matters there. And I think the real test is, does this help us avoid a second downgrade of our credit rating? I don't believe it does. Will it curb the amount of debt our country has compared to the economy? It doesn't. What I think it does do, perhaps, is offer some points, some starting points at least, to begin the real discussion on how we save Social Security and Medicare for the long term. I think that's critical to our investors in America. I think it's critical to our financial future. The president takes some baby steps there, not nearly enough to save either of those important programs, but at least it's a point we can start discussing.
He's also included some new taxes in his budget proposal.
Yeah, and those are dead on arrival. Obviously, the president's had $1 trillion of new taxes in his new health care law. Another $600 billion just several months ago. And so that part of balancing the budget is over. Strong economic growth and spending restraint is really the key. I think the president knows that. And I think one of the things that worries me is that he doesn't seem willing at this point, and maybe he'll change, to save Social Security and Medicare for their own sake. I mean, those are important programs. Piling on new taxes unrelated to either of those programs, that actually makes it harder to save them. I think it's the wrong direction.
In the House Republican proposal, some of the savings that you all have proposed, 1.8 trillion in fact, is savings from repeal of the health care law that was passed in '09. Is that going to be repealed?
You know, the president obviously with the veto pen makes that very difficult to happen. We certainly want the budget to reflect our values, and as importantly, if you talk to Main Street businesses, even larger businesses, the president's health care law, they fear, and I believe will drive up the cost of health care. I think is one of the big drags on the economy today. And the truth is, you know, this is the weakest economic recovery in 70 years. The roadblocks our businesses talk to us about are the higher taxes in the president's budget, is the new health care law, a real concern about a flood of new regulations. And so I think until we can remove those roadblocks, economic growth, we won't see it, and more importantly, it's so critical to balancing the budget, actually getting on firm financial footing.
As a member of the Ways and Means Committee, chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, what about tax reform? Is that active right now on Capitol Hill?
It is, and I think the good news is that tax reform is alive and real. The Ways and Means Committee obviously has taken some significant steps, including releasing drafts of reform, working groups to focus on critical areas. Chairman Baucus in the Senate is taking similar steps, continuing discussions with Chairman Dave Camp. And so Chairman Camp's a charge to us is to move complete real tax reform out of our committee this year, and we're on schedule to do it.
Senator Portman yesterday had some comments for the business community saying get on board with this and quit trying to protect your loopholes, essentially.
Well, you know, it's natural for them to do that, but I've actually sensed a different approach in that businesses, small and large, maybe like families, have just said enough's enough. This current code, which really hasn't been overhauled in a generation, really needs to change. And in fact, in our working groups, I chair the energy working group, yes, there's been discussion of key provisions that are critical to developing jobs in the energy sector, but a willingness to prioritize them and say, look, a lower rate matters, cost of capital matters, here's what works well today. So I actually sense the business community being one of the drivers for fundamental reform.
When do you see a bill coming out of the Ways and Means Committee?
Chairman Camp has set the goal for doing so this year, and certainly the timetable he's had us on with these working groups points exactly to that.
Could you see it this summer?
I don't know as far as the month, but I know the rollout of the first 3 drafts in tax reform have been well received. I think we'll see more of that as well as the larger discussion. So it's a lot of work. It's complex, no question about it. Politically, always difficult. But you've got to put the reform bill on the field, move it down the field. We're hopeful the Senate and the President will join us and stay at the table till we can get it done.
2 more issues before we go to calls, Congressman. Greg Walden breaks with party on chain CPI. This is from Politico. The top House Republican campaign official broke with other GOP leaders Wednesday in criticizing President Barack Obama over his chained CPI proposal. During an interview on CNN, National Republican Congressional Committee Chair Greg Walden, Republican of Oregon, said Obama was trying to balance this budget on the backs of seniors with the plan which could change the way Social Security cost of living adjustments are calculated.
I'm convinced, I think most lawmakers in Washington know we could save Social Security once and for all this afternoon. Everyone knows that we have to both, over time, raise the eligibility age to 70 over perhaps the next 3 decades, and make sure that the benefits are calculated on true cost of living rather than wages. If we do those 2 things, we essentially save that program. The bigger challenge is on Medicare, and that's why the Republican budget focused more on the Medicare side of things, because that's really one of the biggest drivers long term.
So you support the so-called chained CPI approach?
I think there's a smarter way, actually, of tying future benefits for future workers than chained CPI. But at least let's have the discussion on what it takes to save that program. But let's not tie it to higher tax increases on small businesses or cigarettes or local energy workers. Let's save Social Security and Medicare for their own sake.
And finally, another issue swirling here in Washington is the issue of immigration. What are your thoughts?
The issue is long overdue. It's time to actually solve this issue. I read, all I know is what I read. We haven't really seen the proposals that move forward. It seems to me, we need to close the back door of illegal immigration so we can keep open the front door of legal immigration. That front door is broken. I'm one of those who believes we ought to have a workforce that is flexible and can move and flow with the economy so we can have the largest economy in the world for the next 100 years. I personally believe citizenship should be reserved for those who come through the front door of legal immigration. And I also think there ought to be sort of a safe date in immigration reform where after a certain date, those who do enter or try to enter the country through the back door are promptly returned. Because if we don't, we're just going to repeat this problem 20 years down the road.
Representative Kevin Brady, a Republican of Texas, is our guest, and Nancy from Holton, Maine, on our Republican line. You're the first caller. Good morning, Nancy.
Good morning. I just wanted to make a few points in response to the man who was talking about yesterday's knife attack. First of all, Timothy McVeigh did not have a knife, and he had killed 165 people and injured over 800. The 9/11 hijackers did not have guns. And also, so when you look at those two things, look how much damage you can do without using a gun. Plus, I want to bring up that people really don't talk enough about the medications that all these school shooters are taking. And I think that has a real big, I think that's the problem right there. Because I have been on some of those medications, and I know what they can do to your mind. And that's what they work on, is the mind. And when you take the mind of a child that's just developing, and you put those drugs in their mind, you don't know what it's going to do to them.
All right, Nancy, we got the point. Representative Brady?
We do have a culture of violence in America. I don't think it comes from our sportsmen. In fact, it doesn't come from our sportsmen, our hunting families, those who collect guns, those who have to have it for their personal safety. Excuse me. It's a broader issue than that. And I think one of the biggest challenges, and this has become clear in Newtown, in Colorado, with the shooting of Congresswoman Giffords, two things need to occur. One, we really need to focus on what we have today, very strict gun laws that aren't being enforced. And secondly, we have huge gaps in our mental health system. In fact, we don't have a mental health system in America. And while it is tough to do, we really ought to focus on how we can make sure, one, how can we help people who are headed down this path with their mental illness? Second, how do we provide the resource to actually give them some help before this occurs? And it's a big challenge to do that.
Donald, Charlotte, North Carolina, Democrats line. Donald, you're on the Washington Journal.
Hey, good morning. This is my second time calling.
Welcome back.
I think that they're wasting time trying to pass a gun law bill. They need to focus more on jobs. I mean, it's sad that those children got killed, but I really think that tragedy is going to happen. And when you take prayer out of schools and you stop the punishment of the kids, you just suspend them for getting in fights and stuff, that's not helping anything. The kids are getting out and doing what the heck they want to do while their parents at work. I mean, a lot of bullying going on. I think it's unnecessary for them to even think about passing another bill. It's just when a tragedy happens, I think that they just want to add another bill or make it hard for people that deserve to have a gun not to get one.
All right, Donald, thank you. Representative Brady?
Well, two thoughts. One, when I talk to our local teachers, our kids are in our public schools. When I talk to our elementary school, Sally K. Wright Elementary in the Woodlands, Texas, they think of all the options. Having local campus security like we have in the junior highs and the high schools could probably be helpful and might even deter someone from choosing a school in which to do what is, I don't even understand someone who would walk into a school and shoot little children point. I do not understand that. But to your larger point, the economy really ought to be the focus of this Congress. And if we stay the course that we're on, I'm convinced right now we have a big growth gap of we're missing 4 million jobs in the economy, $1 trillion out of the economy that could really get people back to work. That ought to be, the caller's point, really ought to be our focus.
Well, speaking of that, Representative Frederico Wilson, Democrat of Florida, was on the floor yesterday with a chart saying, I think it was 453 days since she's been here, that no jobs bill has been passed by this Congress. Is there a jobs bill that the Congress can pass that can motivate this economy?
Yeah, I don't think she's got good math with those numbers. The House has repeatedly passed, I think, more than 30 separate jobs bills to really get people back to work. But we've not had any votes in the Senate to actually deal with those issues. Secondly, the growth gap we have today is really the result, if you listen to our businesses who want to hire but aren't, it really is fear of new taxes. The president's health care law, whether you believe in it or not, I don't, is having a real impact, a real drag on the economy. The amount of regulation coming out right now is almost unprecedented. That concerns them as well. Then a bigger message is, will Washington get its financial house in order? That's in the back of their minds going forward. And so I think unless we address those roadblocks, we can have a stronger economy. And I also believe we can sort of prove the experts wrong who think our economy in America has permanently slowed, that there's a new normal for the long term. That doesn't have to happen, but we really need to address those issues.
How do you look at the current anemia of economic growth and then the stock market, which is nearing 15,000 points? Yeah,
two words: Federal Reserve. The Fed has pumped a lot of money in this economy, trying to create a wealth effect, both in the housing market and in the stocks. But if you look at average families, at this point in the recovery, they should have gained back about $3,500 in real income for their households. This recovery, it's merely $400. And so the difference between the stock market and what families are seeing is really one of the drivers on why this economy isn't revved back up nearly 4 years after the recession has ended. So until we address what's really happening in the real economy, I don't think we'll see that job growth.
James in Seattle, Independent Line, good morning.
Good morning. Representative Brady, what you are doing is talking out both sides of your mouth. You say you want cuts to Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, and some of your people say they want it, and you just spoke and said that you don't like that. Also, when George Bush, the Republican Party, had the House, the Senate, and the presidency, y'all had a surplus. You blew the surplus, and you ran up record debt. You're talking about paying for things that you have. Why don't we pay and raise taxes enough now to pay for this debt that we have left our kids from these wars, Medicare Part D, and these tax breaks? You guys offer nothing. It's not a single program which you guys have put into place, such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, to help the majority of the American people. All you people do is get up there and try to bring up issues like abortion and these type of issues, regulation. Regulation is stopping nothing. It's not stopping Wall Street. Wall Street has got record profits. It's you. Where's your job
program?
James, your job act?
James, when you say you people, are you referring to Republicans or Congress in general? He is gone. We'll never know for sure.
Yeah, and he was just getting on a roll there. To perhaps the first point, I don't think you can tax this country back to a balanced budget. If I asked James, would you be willing to double your taxes, would everyone in America be willing to double your taxes to help balance the budget? The answer would be no, but even if we did, we still would be running a deficit in this nation. You literally cannot tax your way back to a balanced budget. You've got to have much stronger economy than we have today, and you've got to restrain spending, including looking at common sense ways to save Social Security and Medicare for the long term. That's the balance. Growth and tackling the tougher challenges. That's how we really get our financial house in order. And more importantly, bend the curve. Our debt is to a point where it is a drag on our economy. Let's address those.
It was yesterday that the president introduced his budget. Here he is at the White House.
My budget does also contain the compromise I offered Speaker Boehner at the end of last year, including reforms championed by Republican leaders in Congress. And I don't believe that all these ideas are optimal, but I'm willing to accept them as part of a compromise, if and only if they contain protections for the most vulnerable Americans. But if we're serious about deficit reduction, then these reforms have to go hand in hand with reforming our tax code to make it more simple and more fair so that the wealthiest individuals and biggest corporations cannot keep taking advantage of loopholes and deductions that most Americans don't get. That's the bottom line. If you're serious about deficit reduction, then there's no excuse to keep these loopholes open. They don't serve an economic purpose. They don't grow our economy. They don't put people back to work. All they do is to allow folks who are already well off and well connected game the system. If anyone thinks I'll finish the job of deficit reduction on the backs of middle class families or through spending cuts alone that actually hurt our economy short term, they should think again. When it comes to deficit reduction, I've already met Republicans more than halfway, so in the coming days and weeks, I hope that Republicans will come forward and demonstrate that they're really as serious about the deficits and debt as they claim to be.
Representative Brady.
I would love to see the president send over a tax reform proposal. He's had 4 years. The clock is ticking. We'd love to see him join us in that effort, because we believe we also, like the president, we ought to close loopholes in the tax code. But we believe you ought to do it to lower tax rates for everybody, families and businesses of all sizes, not to close them to spend more money in Washington. That's probably the main difference between us and the president. And secondly, I don't see significant reforms in the president's budget on Medicare, which I think really is the pressing challenge for this country. And I think we face a second downgrade of our credit rating soon if we don't, this summer, come together on a real plan for long-term financial stability. I really think the clock is ticking. It's not something to be done a year or two from now.
With these three budget proposals out there, do you foresee this summer the Congress passing a budget and the President signing one?
I don't. I'd like to believe we could, but there's huge differences, two different visions of how we get this country, how we move the country forward. What I do see, perhaps, if the President would actually focus on Social Security and Medicare to save them for their sake, rather than tie them to extraneous tax increases or other social programs, I actually think we could come up with a plan that puts us on the right path for the long term. Whether he's serious about coming to the table, we don't know, but let's hope so.
So do you see another continuing resolution passed on September 30th?
Boy, I hope not. This is really no way to run a railroad. It doesn't really reflect the priorities of this country. We get stuck in budgets from 4 or 5 years ago. I do think, though, the model that's been used recently, which is not lurch from crisis to crisis, actually put out proposals early, such as, after sequester, putting together the budget funding for the rest of the year was done without a lot of drama and on time. I think with the debt ceiling issue approaching us later this summer, we've got an opportunity. The House is going to move now to put its priorities in place for the Senate. Whether they agree or not, we're going to move now early A, to reassure people that America will pay its debts, but two, reassure investors and those watching America we're actually serious about tackling our problems.
Has sequestration affected your district?
You know, no, it hasn't. And in fact, you've talked in our town hall meetings, we do a lot of them. You know, people just sort of kind of laugh when you talk about a 500-pound government being forced to lose 10 pounds. You know, people know it's just a small step. They're upset that it looks like the White House is choosing to inflict political pain on the community, such as closing local air traffic towers. But for the most part, they think it's a small but important step in the right direction.
Was it a political victory for Republicans?
You know, I think it helped. It helped reassure Americans that we were serious about making some, you know, again, small but important steps in the right direction. Locking those lower levels in was important as well in the funding going forward. But I still think the public is skeptical that both parties and the president have the political courage to get this job done. I believe we do as Republicans. We've already laid out politically I think, courageous steps on Medicare, especially on Medicaid as well, to solve those. The president's now willing to take some small steps toward us. Maybe that's the beginning.
Representative Kevin Brady is the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, and Wallace is a Republican in Dallas. Hi, Wallace.
Hi, sir. Morning, Mr. Brady, and thank you all for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
I'm a ex-police officer, retired military, life member of the NRA, and I collect Smith & Wesson revolvers. My comment for the representative is that I get very leery when the government starts talking about protecting my rights by passing or proposing to pass another bill or law. I'm 75, and I've seen a steady, continuous erosion of our Second Amendment rights. And this is just, I believe sincerely, this is what the Democrats have wanted all along, the so-called closing of the gun show loophole, which is nothing of the kind. I thank God for people like Mr. Brady and our Texas representatives that are fighting to keep our rights intact. That was basically all I had, was just a comment. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your time.
Well, also, I appreciate that. I think the point you're making is that criminals don't buy their guns at gun shows. They don't buy them from licensed dealers. They steal them. They take them from others. They get others to buy them for them and give it to them illegally, straw purchases. We have extremely, I think, strong penalties and laws on the books. Unfortunately, they're just not being enforced, certainly not aggressively. And the number of violations we see, you know, in the thousands versus the prosecutions and convictions literally in the dozens, you know, and until we get serious about that side of enforcement, I don't think we'll see, you know, what we hope is to keep those guns out of those illegally who can no longer own them.
That said, should background checks be expanded, in your view, to gun shows and online sales?
You know, they are. I mean, the gun shows today, the only ones who can sell guns legally are those who are adding to collections and private sales. And so, you know, I believe 90% of all gun purchases actually occur with a background check. And so, and again, because criminals don't buy the guns through the legal process, this won't prevent, unfortunately, another tragedy like we've seen.
Daryl Frazier tweets in, Representative Brady, you say we can't tax our way out of debt. Can we cut our way out of debt?
Not alone. Absolutely not. There has to be strong economic growth in order to generate revenues. For example, if last year our economy was just back up to where it was before the recession hit, our deficit would have been cut in half. Wouldn't have been 1.1 trillion, it would have been half of that. If we get this economy going again and balance it with spending restraint, that's the key. And you create a bunch of jobs, stronger quality of living for families in the process.
Would you be open to any tax increases at this point?
I don't see the purpose or the need for them. The president has $1.6 trillion, huge tax increases already in his pocket. And that clearly isn't getting us back to a balanced budget, because none of the spending or none of the taxes went to deficit reduction. They all went to higher government spending. That's the problem. We actually think, again, strong economy, balanced restraint on spending gets us to where we need to be.
Beverly tweets in, Social Security at age 70? Companies don't keep people employed at that age. Is Washington betting that we don't make it to 70 to collect?
Absolutely not. Over the next 30 years, life expectancy will continue to grow with our young people. People, frankly, are choosing, some are choosing to work because their lifestyles are stronger, they're healthier, they want to. But you continue to keep Social Security available to those at 62 as you do today. And so it isn't a major change. In fact, we already have Social Security at 67 today. And phased in over the next 3 decades, as our young people life expectancy grows, makes sense.
Billy is in Dayton, Ohio, Democrat. Billy, please go ahead.
Yes, and not a proud Democrat at that. I'm sitting here listening to Congress entertain gun background check when in fact we had a Border Patrol agent killed with guns that had been confiscated by the DEA or the ATF. Congress, at the end of the month, should turn their checks back in because you're not doing your job. And what do you say on that?
You know, this has been one of the most, one of a number of troubling instances we've seen in this administration. Fast and Furious was an irresponsible program. It resulted in the death of a U.S. Federal agent. We have tried so hard as a Congress to get to the bottom of that, and we've been stonewalled along the way. There continues to be a contempt case against the Attorney General on here. Look, if the White House believed in that program, then just be open and honest about who approved it and why it occurred. And so from the House standpoint, and I think from some Republicans in the Senate as well, we still want to get to the bottom of this issue, not just for the country, but for the family of the slain agent.
Tom Keller tweets in, do you support the fair tax and the abolition of the IRS?
You know, I do. From the Ways and Means Committee, let me tell you, I think having a much simpler tax, no higher than 25%, all the reform we're doing today is a great step in the right direction. But if you really wanted to jumpstart our economy and really focus on consumption, which I think is the right level and the right way to tax versus taxing people's wages, their investments, their hard work, I actually think that would be long-term the right solution. It's pretty bold for Washington right now. Truth of the matter is we've got a lot of people who are not yet convinced that that's the right approach to go. So we're going to continue to educate lawmakers in America as well.
How's Speaker Boehner doing with regard to leadership?
I think well, mainly because of this. He's taken a great amount of time, both this session and last, in working with a lot of new lawmakers, to lay out what the strategy is in advance, to get their input in exactly those strategies, and to find a way where we can lead with 218 votes in the House. I think setting the debt ceiling back to August, I think the sequestration battle, which clearly we've won, and then the funding for the rest of the year that locked in those lower levels is a good indicator of his leadership.
When you hear cabinet secretaries and administration officials say, well, we have to cut here because the law says so, do these cabinets have flexibility in how they spend their money, in your view?
Of course they do. I think they choose when to have flexibility and they choose when not to. The sequester, they chose not to. I think it was a conscious choice to inflict pain on the public in hopes of reversing the sequester. Health and Human Services created an $8 billion program to fund Medicare Advantage plans that didn't exist, wasn't in law, the money wasn't there, just created out of whole cloth. Of course, the White House has huge flexibility on where these cuts occur.
PP tweets into you, "You're cutting grandma's health care in order to maintain low taxes for the rich. Makes no sense."
Yeah, that's a bumper sticker and isn't accurate. In fact, right now, Social Security disability, it goes bankrupt in 4 years. Medicare itself, such a critical program for my mom, for our parents, the clock is ticking. That's a decade away before it goes bankrupt. The only action that actually jeopardizes Medicare and Social Security is to continue to ignore the financial trouble those programs are in and refuse to act together. It's going to take Republicans and Democrats. We can do it, but it has to happen now. It has to happen this summer.
From Waverly, New York, it's Dave on our independent line. Dave, you're on the Washington Journal.
Yes, just have a couple comments. First off, my condolence and prayers go out to the people in Connecticut. It was terrible. But, on the gun control, I just don't understand, where this is headed and what they think they're going to do. I'm a New York State hunter safety instructor for over 22 years, and things have gone awry. I mean, I just don't understand. I tried to buy a gun a couple months ago for my granddaughter to go turkey hunting this year. For the third time in my life at 55 years old, they put me on hold. You wait for 3 days, they never call back. The sporting goods store gives you an envelope, to send to the Criminal Justice Information Center. 3 years later, I still haven't heard anything back. I mean, it's just a farce. And then, as far as handguns go, there's still handwritten in ledgers. They're not even computerized. So, no one knows. No one knows where it's going. And another thing, even if you close every gun manufacturer, dealership, anything, you're never, ever going to stop criminals from getting handguns.
And we'll leave it there. Congressman Brady?
Well, I think the point's been well made that whether at the federal level, when we've had a ban on assault weapons before, it didn't stop the violence, or in communities like Washington, D.C., Chicago, where there's, complete ban. You can't even buy a gun legally in those communities. Violence is very high and sometimes higher than the rest of the country. I know it's well-intentioned, but government tends to punish those who didn't break the law in order to try to stop those, or at least say, cosmetically, that they tried to stop those who try to do this illegally. It's a bigger issue than the same old political laws that, again, we continue to debate up here.
Jack Hutton tweets into you, Congressman, do you support selling off government assets such as the Tennessee Valley Authority? There's an article this morning.
Yeah, I do. I think when we look at what's the role of government that we don't need to play, or more importantly, how do we actually begin to shrink this deficit by both cutting wasteful spending, selling off assets, properties that the government no longer needs. This makes good sense. And if you look at how other countries who got themselves in financial trouble, how they got themselves back out of it, this is one of the roles, this is one of the behaviors they took, the actions they took, which is to privatize the practices government shouldn't be in, that business can handle, getting rid of the properties and assets that, frankly, the government doesn't use.
Bert, Columbus, Georgia, Republican. Hi, Bert.
Hey, how y'all doing? Thank you for taking my call. I was just wanting to ask a question about a term that we used to use. What happened to the term lockbox? When you pay into Social Security and they take the money and they put it in a Social Security fund, but it keeps getting raided. And another example of that is the post office. The post office would be in pretty good position if the Congress or the federal government would quit raiding their, balance there. I mean, it seems like to me that if you would take the money that you're getting in and spend it for what you get it for, instead of, saying, well, we're going to borrow it from Social Security to pay this bill, and then we're going to put it back in there later on. I mean, if I ran my household like that, I would never get my mortgage payment paid. I'd never get my utilities paid, and I'd never get my car notes paid.
All right, Pat, or Bert, thank you very much.
Ton of common sense in that call. Unfortunately, we needed a lockbox in this country about 30 years ago when the law was changed and Congress and presidents began dipping into that surplus. Social Security, unfortunately, there is no money, no surplus. In fact, last year, America had to borrow roughly $150 billion, that's with the B, $billion from investors, from China, from the Federal Reserve, from others around the world, just to pay our Social Security, just to make sure our seniors got the benefits that they've worked so hard for this year, next year. In fact, Social Security will never see a surplus again unless we take some steps to actually save that program for the long haul. And so I appreciate it. But the other point this gentleman makes is great. You know, why doesn't government use the money that they collected for the intended purposes? We have a lot of programs around America in government where we collect dollars, for example, for maintaining our harbors and ports and waterways, where those monies get diverted to other uses. Meanwhile, you know, we have a huge infrastructure crisis in the ports and rivers and waterways that those dollars ought to go to. The gentleman's point is right on target.
Kevin Brady, a couple of tweets about the post office and keeping Saturday mail. VA Texan says we should sell the post office even before we sell the TVA. And Army Vet Chic says, why do we need Saturday mail? What is so important people can't wait until Monday or use FedEx?
Congress ought to stay out of the approach to allow the Postal Service to make itself solvent. If Saturday delivery can't be afforded, then it can't be afforded. But the Postal Service needs to take tough steps. We need to get out of the way to allow them to do that. And I worry that we continue to meddle and prolong the problem.
Pat, Buffalo, Democrat, please go ahead.
Yes, like this representative, if they're worried about the cost of Medicare, why do we still have the non-negotiable clause in there about pharmaceuticals? Number two, they talk about jobs, but in the last session, they tried to keep the unemployment rate up because it was the best way to beat Obama. And all their job proposals were relaxing regulations. According to economists, only 0.4% is the effect it has on unemployment. And they said there were no jobs in it. And if there were any jobs, even if the relaxed rules were passed, that it would be years down the line. So I don't think they have any interest in jobs.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories that didn't make sense, and that would be one of them. Everyone is rooting for this economy to get better. In fact, it's our communities, our neighborhoods, sometimes our families that struggle to find jobs. And you look today, you know, we have millions of people who've just given up looking for work, a lot of young people, a lot of folks in their prime earning ages that have just given up looking for work. You know, I think Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, I don't care who you are. I think everyone wants to see a much stronger economy than America has today, this very weak recovery. And on your first point, the reason the non-negotiable clause in there is actually not that described that way, but because the government itself and its studies show that that won't save any money. The only way that program would save dollars is if it restricted the drugs that seniors could get. That's a mistake. And it limits where they can get them. They couldn't get them at local pharmacies. Another mistake. And so because the government recognizes those are poor choices for seniors who need to have the best choice of life-saving drugs and to be able to get it locally and conveniently, that's why negotiating drug prices sounds great as a bumper sticker answer. Doesn't work, doesn't save money, isn't good for our seniors.
Representative Kevin Brady, final question. What's the status of Paul Ryan's Medicare 55 and under proposal, and what's your view on it?
Yeah, we hope to take reforms. I stepped over to take the Health Subcommittee for the Ways and Means this year. Our first priority is to permanently solve how we reimburse our doctors through Medicare this year, which is a big challenge, but it can be done. It will be done. Secondly, we want to take the first steps towards structural reform. Congressman Ryan's proposal, we think, is the right approach, and so we're hopeful we can actually translate from the concept and discussion of this to legislation that we begin debating, moving, considering. Again, the clock's ticking.
Who's your ranking member on that subcommittee?
Jim McDermott, who I've had the chance to work with on the Trade Subcommittee for several years. We've tried to take a nuts and bolts approach to health care reform and how we can improve and save Medicare. These are emotional issues. I actually think there's a way to move forward.
Representative Kevin Brady, Chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, a member of the Ways and Means Committee, has been our guest on the Washington Journal. Hour and a half left to go in this morning's program. Coming up next, another member of Congress, a freshman, Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, and we'll talk to him about some of